You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
The program I originally had scheduled for today was Debbie Boscalupi and Alex Newman. They're just getting back in the country from Madrid, Spain, and the COP25 conference, and they asked me if they could postpone their interview until next Sunday, and I said, sure, that's fine. So what we're going to do, Thumper and I are going to be talking about things that are going on in this country, some of the things like the Second Amendment issues in the state of Virginia and Washington. And we're going to be talking about that, but we're also going to show, and a lot of people haven't seen this, but I do a program on Agenda 21 called Sustainable Destruction, Exposing UN Agenda 21 in Rural America. And that program, we're going to go ahead and play that. It's a PowerPoint program. It's on YouTube, but a lot of people haven't seen it, and it will lead into what we're talking about, Agenda 21, so that next week when we have Debbie Boscalupi and Alex Newman on, people should be 100% up to speed on what UN Agenda 21 is. We want that to be the case, and I know a lot of people already know, but I've been told that this PowerPoint program that I do is one of the best and easiest to explain and understand just exactly what Agenda 21 is all about. So that's what we're going to do during an hour of the program today. Thumper, did you get a chance to take a look at any of the information that I passed over there to you? Did you get a chance to preview anything at all, or are we going to look at it for the first time on air today?
We're going to be looking at it the first time today, because I have not had a chance to do that yet, Dan. And
okay, no, that's great. No, that's great. We well, the thing is, I've been doing these programs. I am kind of a nationally recognized expert on UN Agenda 21, and I'm proud of the fact that we've done so many of these programs around the country for various groups. I had the great pleasure of presenting my Agenda 21 program to the Montana State Republican Convention several years ago, and as I like to say, when the program was over, there wasn't a dry seat in the House. It shocked an awful lot of people because they didn't know a whole lot about Agenda 21. And Randy Pinocci, who was a legislator in the state of Montana, was the first guy to introduce an anti-Agenda 21 bill in the Montana legislature, and it nearly passed on the first go around. If we didn't have so many rhinos in the Republican Party in Montana, it would have passed, I think, pretty easily. So we are making headway. Agenda 21 is something that people know. They've heard of it. A lot of people don't know exactly what it is, but they've heard of it now. And 5-6 years ago, half the people or 2/3 of the people in this country had never even heard the term. They knew nothing about it. So we're gaining a lot of ground. And of course, what it boils down to is the people promoting Agenda 21, 2030, and sustainable development are the ones that have intentionally kept it under wraps and kept it quiet, because it literally will change our entire country if they get adopted. It will destroy America as we know it. It will end private property. It will end most of our personal freedoms. And so it's very important that we learn as much as we can about it. In the next couple of weeks, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. On the 5th, we're going to be having Trevor Loudon is going to be joining us. And Trevor's going to be talking about Enemies Within, the books and the movies that he's done about the enemies within the United States Congress and government in our country that are subverting our system of government and trying to bring in communism. So that'll be a fascinating discussion as well. And then I've also got Liz Yore coming on this next month. We're going to have a terrific program over the next month. And Thumper, you and I talked about it. I may ask the program that I had scheduled was Liz Yore on, I believe it's the 11th. Anyway, I may put that back a little bit because we think that probably the issues with the Second Amendment right now are very, very important and right in front of everybody. What's going on in Virginia, what's going on in Washington, what's going on in Colorado, what's going on pretty much everywhere in our country now, and the attempts to subvert our Second Amendment rights and some of the responses by various states. And I'm going to have Dr. Edwin Vieira, who is probably the foremost expert in the country on the well-regulated militia, and I will try to have him on that program on, I believe, the 11th or the 12th of January. So we've got a full month coming up, and I thank everybody for their interest in what we're doing. Thumper, as you and I've talked, I like scratching places that some people don't like scratched, and sometimes it stirs a few nerves. But the bottom line is if we can't talk openly and freely, then we're just exactly like the people that we can't stand. And
well, and it's really important to have reasonable conversation, and people can present their ideas. That's one of the most important ways that we find that we really don't have the differences that we think we might, that have been promoted by this mass media, mockingbird media effort that's out there. And, I appreciate that some people maybe aren't well versed in how to sometimes present their information in such a way as that you can have a conversation. Some people like to just really.
Thumper, you and I both have agreed to this. Most people in this country, they don't teach debate in schools anymore. And when I was a kid, we were taught debate. It was part of the school curriculum, and it fostered good civic dialogue. Everybody, you didn't get screaming mad at people, and you didn't call people every name in the book. What it boiled down to is that you proved they were wrong because you would prove it with logic. You would prove it with discernment. You would prove it with facts.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
So.
If anybody has any questions about, I have not received any information from last week's guest. And so if you're asking where it is, it's not with me yet. So we'll put that issue to rest right now. Mm-hmm. All right. And to carry on here, in talking about, like, say, the Second Amendment and what's happening in Virginia and here in Washington State and other states as well, where there's an active, very, very active and aggressive effort to use the legislators that are currently in office. Most likely they didn't earn that place lawfully. I'll just say that. And they are being used to usurp our state constitutions, our local laws, by the use of misleading media campaigns, other local law officials who are not in support of, let's just, we'll stick with the Second Amendment for right now, but it's a very concerted effort that we're seeing by so many of these folks who have basically taken the money and are now paying back the debt by their support of these types of activities. I was on a phone call here just a few minutes ago with one of the folks from the National Liberty Alliance, and they are seeing this, and they're starting to pay attention and develop some of their material in support of the Second Amendment and the lawful activities which can be brought to bear against, not just for the Second Amendment, but for all of the usurpations of our state constitutions and our federal constitutions through the use of their grand juries and those types of activities. I was going to have John Duresh on the hour that I did, a couple of hours ago, but he wasn't able to show up. But he will be back on I believe it's the 5th of January with me on that hour. So we're gonna be diving into this because I think that this is a very, very important issue, and we need to educate much, much more of our public as to the responsibilities that we have towards our Constitution and the security of this nation. It is we the people, and we've raised this question several times and this topic up numerous times about the people are the militia. And as a matter of fact, I just got a document sent to me by the folks over there at Liberty Alliance, and it's
Randy, we too. I will really make an effort, and I know he'll come on, Dr. Edwin Vieira, because he has studied for decades the whole concept of the citizen militia and understands it probably better than anybody in the country. Mm-hmm. And it is very definitely, it is part of our system of government. It was designed to be a citizen militia because, yes, in fact, the reason for it was because a citizens militia of local citizens could react to local events that may require their participation. They could help local sheriffs. They could respond to natural disasters. They could respond to local uprisings or whatever. And it was important to have the citizen militia there because they were local people and they knew the terrain, they knew the issues, they knew who was right, who was wrong. They knew that. And that's why local militias have always been a very, very important part of our system of government. It was intended that way.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, okay, I've got a copy on the screen right now. I'm going to put it up on share. It's the Militia Act of 1792. You're familiar with that, right, Dan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think maybe if we take a look at that, folks can get an actual understanding of really just what our founding fathers, because this was 1792, shortly after the formation of the Union, and 1792, the Militia Act of 1792, Second Congress, Section 1, Chapter 28, I think that is, passed May 2nd, 1792, providing for the authority of the President to call out the militia. Section 1, being enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that whenever the United States shall be invaded or be in imminent danger of invasion from any foreign nation or Indian tribe, it shall be lawful for the President of the United States to call forth such number of the militia of the state or states most convenient to the place of danger or scene of action as he may judge necessary to repel such invasion, and to issue his orders for that purpose. To such officer or officers of the militia he shall think proper, and in case of an insurrection in any state against the government thereof. Now, I wonder if that includes actions by an out-of-control legislature who are actually in defiance of our own federal Constitution.
Right. I think it was intended that way, Thumper. I really do. Yeah.
It shall be lawful for the President of the United States, on application of the legislature of such state or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened, to call forth such number of the militia in any other state or states as may be applied for, or as he may judge sufficient to suppress such insurrection. Section 2, and be it further enacted that whenever the laws of the United States shall be opposed or the execution thereof obstructed in any state by combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. Well, when you have a co-opted judiciary, that I believe that President Trump is working very, very hard on replacing these judges and filling these judgeships. I think he's working very hard to place judges into these positions, because we know that they were left open by the previous resident of the White House, so that the supposedly next in line, which was in their opinion going to be Hillary Clinton, she would have full ability to place her judges into those positions, which would not have been good for the people at large. It was a very overt way that they were going to put the final nail in the coffin as far as our judiciary. And
I think you're right. Incidentally, as of I believe the end of the year, he will have placed 172, I think the number is, new judges in place.
Yeah, I was listening. Let's see, was it yesterday? Yeah, I was out in the car yesterday. I was listening to the soapbox, and somebody was actually covering that. Well, he did a speech yesterday, and they were live streaming the speech from President Trump at Turning Point, I believe, is where he gave that speech yesterday, and he actually said it in there. He was talking about it in that speech, where he said, I came into office, and there were like 160 60 some. I think right now he's at 172, as you just mentioned there, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And that is hugely important that we get judges on these benches that understand the rule of law and understand their place in it.
Mm-hmm.
And because we've lost control of our country because the judiciary, this corporate judiciary that we've been dealing with, has been working in the interest of the corporation, not in the interest of the American people.
Absolutely. Well, and there also, if and I anticipate it will happen, President Trump is elected to a second term, he could very easily replace, have 5 new justices, including the ones he's already assigned, and it could even be as high as 6 before he leaves office. That's absolutely amazing.
Liberal heads are exploding if they're listening to your words right now.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. Well, I can see why.
Yeah.
I can see why. Well, so also, and it turned out Matt Shea has been attacked in an absolutely horrible way over the last couple of weeks, and especially over the last couple of days. And we anticipate we're going to try to get Matt Shea on the radio program. It was his anniversary this weekend, so I think he and his wife had planned a trip out of town. But we will get Representative Matt Shea on to talk about what they've been doing with him, too. That will happen within the next couple of weeks. We'll figure out a way to get that on. So, yeah.
They what they've been doing to Matt Shea, and he actually is attacked more by the Rhino Republicans of Washington State, of which there's many in this area where I live. They talk a good game, but their actions definitely do not are not in favor of true constitutional Republicans when you look closely at their actions. And they have been working overtime to demean, to find any fault that they can with anything that Matt does. And I would really like to have Matt come on because I think that he could make his case very, very well against a lot of these people. And personally, I think he needs to take the attitude similar to what President Trump is doing and start calling these people out for who and what they are. The Rhino Republicans in Eastern Washington are many, and they've learned well how to play the game of appearing to be Republicans when in fact they're just allowing the liberal agenda to continue to be pushed further and further down the road here in Eastern Washington, because this has always been a very, very strong conservative bastion in the state, and unfortunately, fortunately, actually, it still is when you get amongst the population, but they have been courting that population by these rhinos, and they've set up the same old scenario. We have people that just keep getting elected to office because the Republican Party won't allow alternative candidates to run for these positions. They get sidelined and they're not allowed to run. So they continue to control the representatives and the people that we get to fill the elected positions in the eastern side of the state, as they've done over on the western side of the state as well. That is one of their main tactics, Dan, as you well know.
Oh yeah,
They
I've been there.
party, and the party controls who gets to run for office.
Right. Yeah, I've been there on that. I was very active with the Montana Republican Party. I actually ran for the state chair position a few years back, and they changed the rules 5 minutes before the vote and changed the rules that had been in place for 80 some years because they knew I was going to win the state chair position. And changed the rules so that the other two candidates running against me could combine their votes. The loser of the first round could combine his votes with the other guy to beat me. And it ended up being, I think they won by 12 votes out of 240 some votes. And they had to change the rules that had been in place for 80 years to be able to do that. So they know how to play the game. They really do. And there were a lot of, I think, really good patriots and good conservative people that went along with what they were doing because they thought they were doing the right thing. That's the problem. They convince people that they are doing the right thing when, in fact, they're manipulating the system to their advantage. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, there is a petition here in Washington State to repeal I-1639. We have until the 28th of this month to get, I think it's 28,000 signatures on that thing. And I will, let's see, I've got a link to it here. There's a list of places where people can go around the state to sign that petition. I went out yesterday and I actually found it. And I got my name on that petition. I had to go to a couple of different places though, because the first place I went to, they'd already turned in their petition, and but we need to here in the state of Washington. If you're familiar, go to your local gun shop, your local gun range. There's several other places. I will try to get a link out there as soon as I find it here, where you can actually find out where these petitions are. In your local area here in the state, and get out there. And if you can, in the next few days, we don't have a lot of time left, but people need to get their names on that petition here in Washington State so that we can put a fork in this bunch of BS that they're calling this this I-1639 silliness. Definitely, we want to go down. We want to get down that road. Okay, it's a Google Docs. I'm going to put it here in live chat. It's a spreadsheet on Google Docs. You can go there and get a copy of this list, and it'll show you where you can go in your local area to get your name on that petition to repeal I-1639. So those of you who are legal residents of the state of Washington, I need you guys to get on board, move your fannies out, because we've only got a few days left before they have to collect and count these petitions up to make sure that we the people act on this. Okay, so just follow the link there. It's a Google Docs spreadsheets, and it'll give you a list of all the places. There's probably more than just these, but these are the ones that are on the list. So if you want to go someplace, you might want to give them a call first and make sure that they haven't turned in their petitions yet. But definitely, folks, we need to act on this. It's really important, because if you want them to know that we have a voice and we're not afraid to use it, this is what we need to do. And as you can see, it's listed by their city, and the name of the business. They even have the telephone number there and the address. And it's for the entire state of Washington. These are all the different places that are logged in. That you might find a petition other places, but if you're looking for a guaranteed place where you can go and you can sign this petition, please download that list that I just put out there in the live chat, and get out there. Call them first, make sure they still have the petition available, and get over there and get it signed, please. This is citizen action that we need to get done. Thanks for allowing me the time there, Dan.
No, Thumper, tell people what that initiative is about, and because I'm not a Washington resident, so I don't know anyway. But tell the listeners what that's about. Maybe it'll pique their interest.
Well, first off, it in the description of the firearms, it basically made just about every single firearm out there an assault weapon by their definition that they put in there, which is does not match either the federal definition of what an assault. Well, there is no real definition of an assault weapon. So what they did was they made a definition for an assault weapon, which basically includes any firearm that has a detachable magazine, a center fire, uses a center fire cartridge. It can have certain aspects of it, a collapsible stock on it. It basically they wrote it with enough generalities, very similar to what they did in Virginia on their recent or where their soon to be attempt. Because what they did was they took a lot of what they did here in Washington State under Initiative 1639 and rolled it over into Virginia. Only they added a few extra things to the Virginia one, where they made it. They're going to make it illegal for you to even train somebody. You can't even train somebody to kickbox, or else you're training a terrorist or something like that. They haven't gotten that far here in Washington State, but if you look at the list of things that Inslee and Ferguson have in line, they're going to catch up to Virginia if they possibly can. They also raised the age in Washington State at the age of 18. You used to be able to buy a long gun, a rifle. Now you have to be 21. They also put in a training requirement that most of the NRA courses at the time the initiative was passed didn't qualify. So people had to come up with these different courses that qualified for the state mandated training that you have to show before you purchase a firearm now. Many instructors, even though they held an instructor's card from several different sanctioning firearms bodies, those people had to go and go through this. I mean, and the requirement of this thing was so silly that any one of these qualifications, me as a range officer for action shooting, wouldn't have been sufficient. But I am fully qualified as a range officer to be out on a course of fire with somebody running and gunning and shooting targets, changing magazines. It's action shooting. It's moving and shooting and all that. Even me being a qualified range officer for that wouldn't have qualified for this gun safety BS that they put in this thing. They also mandated that you no longer, because you held a concealed carry permit, which I do, would allow you to go in and step aside of the 5-day waiting period. Now everybody has to go through that 5 or 10 day or whatever waiting period that they have going. Doesn't matter whether you have a concealed carry permit or not. In the state of Washington, it is a shall issue state, but you still have to go through the background check, and you still have to apply to your local police department or sheriff's department in order to get your concealed carry. So they've just stepped way outside the limits on all of this. To include, now you have to go through the basic, when you bought a handgun in Washington State, you had to go through the federal NICS check, and then they had a state check. And now to buy a long gun, they've added that step back in to purchasing of a long gun, and the state has to run their own special background check, which is silly, especially when you combine that with the idea of the concealed carry permit. You've already shown that you qualify to carry a concealed carry. You have a concealed carry permit, which allows you to carry concealed in the state of Washington. And so all of these things, they're just adding on more BS. It will not stop those people who will go outside the law and hurt people with firearms. It won't stop that. None of this will, because those people that do these kinds of things don't typically purchase their firearms lawfully anyway. They're typically stolen. They're or bought on the back alleys, any number of ways. It's just it puts more. They basically penalize your lawful gun owners, your good guys. It's penalizing the good guys who want to have a firearm in lieu of trying to stop the bad guys, because they're going to go to no lengths to get their firearms, and they're going to go to no lengths to do whatever they decide they want to do with that firearm.
Mm-hmm. Well, Randy, you know as well as I do, it's never been about taking guns away from criminals. It's always been about destroying the Second Amendment, because we're the last country in the world that has a heavily armed civilian population that legally own these weapons, and that scares the crap out of the people who want to take over the entire country and make us just one part of the New World Order. Thumper, let's take the time now. Let's go ahead and start that video.
Sure.
And that way we can. I want to have enough time at the end of that where anyone that has questions, I'd love to answer questions.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and start that. This is my PowerPoint program. It was done in Kalispell, Montana, in Chuck Baldwin's church a few years back, and it's called Sustainable Destruction, Exposing UN Agenda 21 in Rural America.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you, folks. My name is Dan Happel. I'm a county commissioner from Madison County in southwest Montana. However, I've got a standard disclaimer that I use. I am not here representing Madison County, or am I here representing the county commissioners for my county. I am here as a concerned citizen representing the other freedom-loving Americans that are concerned about a process that we have in this country and a program called Agenda 21 that is being implemented all over our country. I give a better than money back guarantee on my programs. My better than money back guarantee is that the first person that can prove anything substantively incorrect with the basic thesis of this program, I will give $1,000 cash. And so I hope that people will actually try to check my program out, do your own search, and you'll find that it is accurate. And I've been giving the same guarantee for over 6 years, and I've never had anyone collect a dime. So hopefully that'll continue because, well, let's put it this way. If you do collect on it, that means I'm wrong, and I can go home and I can get a lot of rest, and I can quit doing this stuff. So anyway, this is the Big Footprint Conference. 3 years ago this summer in June, I was asked to be a speaker at a program called the Big Footprint Conference. This was a program at UCLA at the Faculty Center. There's some of the top scientists and experts in the country were speakers at this program. And okay, try it again. All right, and a lot of them were faculty at various universities, scientists from all over the world, PhDs, quite a number of really, really good experts. And this is me here, but I was asked to be a member of this discussion and this panel because I was one of 2 county commissioners in the United States that were actively fighting against Agenda 21. And this gentleman here, Richard Rothschild, he was Carroll County, Maryland, the first county in the United States to throw ICLEI out. And so we had a great bunch of experts here. We had amazing bunch of people. This Peter Wood is the president of the National Scholars Association. We had PhDs all over, and frankly, I was completely outgunned. This is a philosophy of rights, and this is a comparison of individual rights under the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the community rights under the UN Declaration of Human Rights. There's quite a difference. We need to look at those. The purpose of government under the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the purpose is to protect the natural or unalienable, and that is the correct pronunciation, unalienable, rights of each individual. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And in short, you're born with rights. Government exists just to protect those rights, and you and the product of your labor belong to you and not to the government. Under the community rights of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, control of the individual for the greater good of a global community. Rights and freedoms in no way may be exercised contrary to the purposes and the principles of the United Nations. And under this system, government grants, restricts, or withdraws your rights according to its needs, not yours. And you and the product of your labor belong to the community, and that's communism. This is a famous quote by George Washington: government is not reason, it's not eloquent, it is force, and like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And Daniel Webster said in 1854, good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of power. It is hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they do mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be your masters. And this is a cartoon from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. This gentleman here is Karl Marx. Behind him is J.P. Morgan, Teddy Roosevelt, our first progressive socialist president. This gentleman here is Perkins, and J.D. Rockefeller, and Ryan behind him, the president of the Rockefeller Banks. And this is Andrew Carnegie. And I don't think most people are aware of this, but U.S. and European bankers were the primary source of funds for the Bolshevik Revolution and made it possible for Lenin and Trotsky to overthrow Tsar Nicholas and the reform government that had been put in place. That reform government had been in power for 6 months, and it was actually a constitutional Republican form of government very similar to our own. It's no accident that communism ended up taking over in Russia. Okay, this is Fabian Society. This is the famous Fabian window at the Fabian Society in London. And you'll see this in the leaded glass and stained glass. We mold it near the heart's desire. This is a crest here that talks about devotion, and this talks about the prayer and devotion to socialism. These folks here are praying to a stack of books on socialism. And the crest of the Fabian Society is this right here. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And this is Sidney Webb, and they are pounding or forming the molten earth into the shape that they want. This is the Fabian socialism that's been driving much of European and American socialism for the last 120 years. This is the Communist Manifesto. I'm sure we all recognize many of these. This is a chart that shows how many of these programs are actually being implemented by various agencies of our own federal government. Abolition of private property, heavy progressive income tax, abolition of rights of inheritance, confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels, a central bank system, government control of communications and transportation, government ownership of factories and agriculture, government control of labor, corporate farms and regional planning, and government control of education. How many of those have we not been affected by? Virtually everything in that Communist Manifesto is at least in part in our programs in our government right now. This is Stalin's 1936 Communist International. This was the official program declaration of that conference. This world dictatorship can be established only when the victory of socialism has been achieved and newly established proletarian republics enter into a federative union with the already existing proletarian republics. And when these federations of republics have finally grown into a world union of Soviet socialist republics, uniting the whole of mankind under the hegemony of the international proletariat organized as a state. This sounds an awful lot like the UN, and I think most people recognize that. And this is a quote from Stalin: America's like a healthy body. Its resistance is threefold: its patriotism, its morality, and its spiritual life. If we can undermine these three areas, America will collapse from within. And I believe that's in the process of happening today. And this is a Google search, if you wish, the 1936 Soviet Constitution. And the Declaration of Human Rights under the UN is virtually identical to the Declaration of Human Rights under the Soviet Constitution in 1936. And there's a reason for that. Alger Hiss was the lead American author. And matter of fact, Joel Skousen referred to Alger Hiss last night in his speech. And Alger Hiss was the American author and executive secretary of the Dumbarton Oaks Conference that drafted the framework for the United Nations. Hiss was accused and later convicted of perjury for his part in Soviet espionage activities while serving in the State Department. He was the first Secretary General of the United Nations. And he was secretary for about a year, and then he was asked to resign in disgrace when all this information came out. And this is some of the folks in this room that are my age remember Nikita Khrushchev. Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you will finally wake up and find that you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands. This was in 1959. This was actually part of his speech at the UN when he pounded his shoe on the podium. And then Yuri Andropov, and well, I'll try to make some connections here. Yuri Andropov was the premier of the Soviet Union in the 80s, and he had a policy that was a strategic move to get communism in the Western countries. He recognized that he couldn't beat us militarily because our political system and our economic system was too strong, and it would bury the Soviet system. So he decided to start implementing communism through gradualism, and it had been going on for quite some time. But that push really started happening under the Andropov plan. And if folks want to do a little of their own research, look into Antonio Gramsci and the prison notebooks. Gramsci actually wrote much of what Andropov used in this strategy. And this is several books that are worth looking at. This is Anatoly Golitsyn, Perestroika Deception, and this is Disinformation. This was written by a general. Actually, he was a lieutenant general in the Bulgarian, I believe, or Romanian military. And he basically, both of these gentlemen said, this whole idea of the fall of communism is a scam. You folks had better wake up because this is just deception. And this is, I'm going to use some quotes here. This is James Paul Warburg, who was the son of Paul Warburg, one of the authors of the Federal Reserve Act. He met on Jekyll Island, where they dreamed up the policy of the Federal Reserve. And this is a quote in 1950 before the U.S. Senate. We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or by consent. And underneath that, Rowan Gaither, the president of the Ford Foundation, is quoted as saying, and this is 1954, "We operate here under directives that emanate from the White House. The substance of the directives under which we operate is that we shall use our grant-making power to alter life in the United States so that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." And so welcome to the New World Order. And this book right here, Limits of Growth, this is a book that came out of the Club of Rome. And this was a book that talked about how our reduction in consumption and our reduced roles in utilizing our natural resources and control of the people could happen. And they determined after quite a bit of study that environmentalism would be a good avenue to pursue because it would provide a very hard, very difficult to track policy that they were going to be able to follow and be able to take over our system of government. Agenda 21, I know a lot of, if you talk to our congressmen and our senators, they'll tell you they don't know a thing about it, they never heard of it. this is Paul Simon, wrote the introduction to this book on Agenda 21. They know completely everything there is to know about Agenda 21, and they know exactly what it is, and they're involved in the implementation, at least a significant number of them. This is Agenda 21. It is the name of the white paper that was produced after the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. It outlines a socialist plan for a sustainable world. I mean, we hear that word a million times a day anymore. A sustainable world in the 21st century. This is the book right here. It's 700 and some pages, and it covers everything they plan to do. The Rio Summit was billed as a world conference on the catastrophic global environmental issues facing mankind and a blueprint for a sustainable 21st century. In reality, the Rio Summit was a blueprint for the future of mankind, where our Constitution, national sovereignty, and unalienable rights are eliminated and replaced by a world government controlled by a powerful cartel of international financial elites. Agenda 21 is a blueprint for the 21st century, and the summit was organized and chaired by UN Under-Secretary Maurice Strong. He's the Secretary General of UNCED. Mr. Strong is a Canadian billionaire, an acknowledged Marxist, and now he is living in communist China and acting as an advisor to the Chinese government on economic policy and international trade agreements. And this is a quote by Mr. Strong. "It's clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake and consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, use of fossil fuels, ownership of motor vehicles and small electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable." And this is Mr. Strong right here, and this is his very good friend, Mikhail Gorbachev. This was at the Rio Plus 5 conference in March of '97. And Mr. Gorbachev, a lot of people don't know what happened to Mr. Gorbachev. Well, when he was deposed as the Soviet leader, and he was the premier of the Soviet Union, he was given millions of dollars by the Ford and Rockefeller foundations to fund the Gorbachev Foundation. And the Gorbachev Foundation is a parent of Green Cross, which is the most respected and revered environmental organization in the world. And this is Kevin Spacey and Sharon Stone at a gala event that they had to celebrate, I believe it was his 84th birthday, at the Royal Palladium in London. And most people don't realize, but Gorby has never renounced his ties to international communism. In fact, they're stronger than ever. This is a quote in November of 1987. In October 1917, we parted with the old world, rejecting it once and for all. We are moving into a new world, a world of communism. We shall never turn off that road. Comrades, do not be concerned about all that you hear about glasnost and perestroika and democracy in the coming years. These are primarily for outward consumption. There will be no significant internal change within the Soviet Union other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep. Now, this was just a couple of years. This was 4 years before the fall of the Soviet Union, so-called fall of the Soviet Union. And this is, right now, this is Vladimir Putin, the new premier, or president he is now, of the Soviet Union, and they call it Russia. But he's restructuring. He's putting the whole thing back together. I mean, that's what this thing that's going on in the Ukraine, in all of the stands of the Middle East and what used to be part of the Russian republics, they are going to be restructured. We are moving into a world communist system. And this is a quote from David Rockefeller. We've got to bring the money into this equation. Some even believe that we're part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. This is a quote by David Rockefeller in his memoirs in 2002. And interestingly, Marxism, we know what Marxism, communism, Marx called it scientific socialism. Communism can best be defined as the elimination of private property. That's a quote from V.I. Lenin. And Prince Philip, one of our British sovereigns who happens to be one of our allies, who happened to found the World Wildlife Fund, incidentally, in one of his quotes, "We reject the idea of private property." And you'll love this picture. Here's Prince Philip right here. This is Castro. They're good friends. And this quote, in marked contrast to the near universal jeers and boos that greeted every U.S. representative at Rio, the Earth Summit, the Agenda 21 Earth Summit, throngs went wild for Castro, who was greeted with prolonged tumultuous applause and calls of Viva Fidel. And this is incidentally George Soros over here, and a quote by him: "The main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States." Now, anybody that knows anything about George Soros knows that he's pumping billions of dollars into various left-wing programs in this country that are supporting all kinds of environmental and all kinds of other left-wing agendas. He does not believe in the United States. He would like to see the United States destroyed. This is a book that came several years after the Rio Summit. It's Our Global Neighborhood. Nelson Mandela was a participating writer and wrote a general overview of that report. And Nelson Mandela here, who happens to be the darling of the left, and a lot of us think he's a really great guy. This is a picture of him with Joe Slovo, who is the head of the ANC, the African National Conference, which is a communist group, and they're standing in front of the hammer sickle, and you'll see the clenched fist. This is a sign of international communism, and you will see that at many of the SEIU and the Occupy Wall Street events, and we'll see that shortly. But Mr. Mandela is a darling of the UN, and they made a day to inspire people to give 67 minutes of one day a year to public service just for in memory of Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela was the president of South Africa, and while he was president, these folks here were Boer farmers in Dutch Boer beans farmer, and they were killed, and that's happening on a regular basis throughout Africa. A lot of the colonial farmers that have been there for well over 100 years are being killed, and their farms are being taken away and turned into collectives for the Friends of the Powerful Leaders in South Africa. And this gentleman right here happens to be the new ANC chief and president, Jacob Zuma. And Mr. Zuma is a self-described communist, and he sings songs at various events like Kill the Boer, inciting genocide against whites. This is all we heard about was apartheid in South Africa. We've got a new racism going on that is much worse in South Africa than the apartheid, or every bit as bad. This is Occupy Wall Street group. You see this clenched fist. Again, that's a sign of international communism. And they've been treated, Occupy Wall Street has been treated as a populist, inclusive, pro-American demonstration of the majority of Americans, and has given favorable reviews, while the Tea Party has been labeled as a bunch of right-wing radicals and extremists, and that just is not so. And this is one of the groups that show up at all of the major Occupy Wall Street rallies. This is a group called Anonymous. They are international anarchists. And this is a picture of a group of young college students that are protesting. And this sign is pretty, you see this at a lot of these rallies. The whole system has got to go. Capitalism is organized crime. This is the stuff that our kids are being taught at the university level, and they're out on the street promoting it. And this is another Occupy Wall Street, this young man here, Eat the Rich. And this, I'd say gentleman, with the sign behind him, that's solidarity, that's international communism. These signs and these people show up at all these events, all the major ones, certainly. And this is Arab Spring, and this is Hammer and Sickle, and we recognize that. Arab Spring that our president was so proud to promote because it was a truly great independence movement. Now we see what's going on in the Middle East, and it's pretty sad. This is another quote by David Rockefeller. One is impressed immediately by the sense of national harmony. Whatever the price of Chinese revolution, it has obviously succeeded in fostering high morale and community purpose. General social and economic progress is no less impressive. The enormous social advances of China have benefited greatly from the singleness of ideology and purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in history. Now, this was after the Great Leap Forward. This was after the Cultural Revolution. This was after some estimates as high as 50-some million Chinese were killed under Chairman Mao's leadership. Anyway, President George Herbert Walker Bush signed the Rio Accords at the 92 Summit on behalf of the United States. Within months, cabinet-level agencies and UN-sponsored NGOs started embedding policies of sustainable development into bureaucratic regulations and lobbying efforts. Shortly after his inauguration in '93, President Bill Clinton created the President's Council on Sustainable Development by Executive Order. By making sustainable development a permanent feature of all federal policy within the administrative branch, he effectively bypassed Congress and threw Agenda 21 implementation into high gear, forever changing the mission of federal agencies from serving the people to serving the environment. I think we all remember the days when Forest Service trucks, the old green trucks with radio deletes, and they were people that worked so hard for the public interest and the public trust, and now they're serving the environment. And it really has radically changed if you've had contact with a lot of these agencies. The Sustainability Treaty failed passage in the U.S. Senate in '94 is required under our Constitution by a vote of 98-2 because of the last-minute heroics on the Senate floor by Dr. Michael Kaufman and Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. And this is a map that was presented on the floor of the Senate. All the red areas are core reserves and corridors with virtually no human use. The buffer zones, these yellow areas, are very highly regulated use with very limited human activity. And the normal use basically is this right here. You'll see kind of throughout the Midwest and up on the High Line. And this is a map of the percentages of federal land that are owned in the United States by the federal government. You hear about this movement to try to transfer public lands. Well, the federal government's going to fight this tooth and nail because this is a very key element of their collection of public lands that will end up becoming part of this global commons. In the western states, Montana has 30% federal land. Nevada and some of the states have over 80%. We're going to see a real fight over this. They're not going to give up that land easily. And this is Montana, and this kind of shows you, this is the red areas that are basically no human use. Here you are right here in Kalispell. And you'll see that these areas are very, very small areas that human use is even going to be considered. And they will be very tightly monitored. And this is from the UN Habitat Conference, Habitat 1 in Vancouver in 1976. This was agenda item number 10, and this is a quote from that. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. If unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and the implementation of development schemes. These aren't our development schemes. These are the UN's development schemes. And if you look at this language, it is clearly communist language. Sustainability of the environment and creating a more equitable world are buzzwords for destruction of the middle class through income redistribution, applying impossibly restrictive regulations that destroy private property rights, and the deliberate deindustrialization of America and Western Europe through international trade organizations such as NAFTA, GATT, WTO, North American Union, and the European Union. And we constantly hear people talking this morning at the MACO conference. We had gentlemen go up talking about the WTO and some of these trade agreements and how we needed to comply and work with them. This is the mentality. Under Agenda 21, many of man's activities are listed as unsustainable and targeted for elimination by 2030. All private property ownership and rights will be eliminated. All forms of crop irrigation, pesticides, and commercial fertilizers, except when approved for big agribusiness, such as Monsanto, ADM, etc. Livestock production and most meat consumption will end. We will be living in a vegetarian world. Privately owned vehicles and personal travel will be a thing of the past. Burning of fossil fuels for energy production or personal vehicular travel will be a thing of the past. Single-family homes and suburban housing will be a thing of the past. Most forms of mineral extraction and timber harvesting will be ended. Dams, golf courses, ski lodges, and vacation resorts will be phased out and eventually eliminated. And then this is the scary part of it, and this is in their writing. You can find it in their writings, in various writings. Human population needs to be reduced. We are not living in a sustainable population right now, and it needs to be reduced. They said originally to under 1 billion people. I've read recently that they say it could be as much as 2.5 billion people if we follow all of the dictates and all of the programs of Agenda 21. That's still reducing a population from 7 billion to 2.5 billion. That's huge. So to implement the ideas of sustainable development, an overlapping of three primary objectives must occur. We'll refer to them as the three E's of equity, economy, and the environment. Let's see what they look like under the framework of Agenda 21. And this is the sweet spot right here. These are good spots. This is the sweet spot. Equity. It means using the law and government to restructure and modify human nature. It allows special interests to use the police powers of the state to force compliance with laws that are antithetical to constitutional law. It allows educators and social engineers to stifle individualism, personal responsibility, and self-reliance, and promotes a complete shift in attitudes through public education and social justice indoctrination to a more just and equitable world where communalism is good and self-interest in capitalism is redefined as greed. Communalism is the new word for communism. This mindset substitutes social justice, redistribution policies for equal justice, which are equal rights under the law, and destroys the concept of unalienable rights under the law. The youth will be taught that they're global citizens rather than Americans, and educators will be unwittingly teaching the views and dictates of socialist global planners through programs like Goals 2000, No Child Left Behind. The new one is Common Core. Those programs are modeled from UNESCO's global program, Education for All. These are UN programs that inspire many of these U.S. education programs today. And the term equitable is used to describe the transfer of wealth from developed nations to underdeveloped nations by moving manufacturing and infrastructure to third world countries through a carbon credit system under the blanket of cleaning up the environment. This is a chemical plant in China. If it was about cleaning up the environment, I don't think we'd be sending our clean chemical industries and our EPA-regulated industries to China. It's not about the environment. Economy, transfer of wealth from developed countries to underdeveloped countries or developing countries. The authors of Agenda 21 use a Marxist socialist worldview that treats life as a zero-sum game where the creation of wealth can only come at the expense of others less fortunate. Living in third world or exploited countries. The monetary systems of sovereign nations must be collapsed and merged into a world financial system controlled by a cartel of international banking elites and their cadre of central bank planners. Under this system, under a one-world financial system, all human activity can be closely monitored and tightly controlled. Digital financial transactions will rapidly evolve into a cashless society where an electronic device implanted in a card or under the skin will be scanned and electronically entered into a database that will record all of your transactions. Anyone that fails to comply with the regulations or exhibits an attitude of resistance may have their transactions denied and will either comply or they will starve. That simple. And this is a quote by our friend David Rockefeller, who happens to be, I think there's no question he's the richest man in our country, if not the world. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and the other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promise of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries. This was a speech that was reported clear back in '91 As a matter of fact, the year before the Earth Summit, at the Bilderberger Conference, I don't remember what country that was in, the environment is the next item on the 3 E's. The environment will be used as a tool to promote political ideas and agendas that would otherwise be so wildly unpopular that they would have no chance of being implemented. Through various smart growth, zoning regulations, wilderness bills, wildlands and endangered species initiatives, private property can become increasingly controlled and eventually eliminated. Unelected stakeholder councils are organized to give local governments a consensus or a vision statement for their communities. These groups, in effect, are transferring individual property rights to a collective system where all property is tightly controlled by a central planning authority. A regional, national, or internationally sanctioned tax-exempt NGO is usually behind these efforts and acts as a facilitator to steer the stakeholders to a predetermined conclusion. Land use laws become progressively more restrictive, expensive to implement, and difficult to litigate until property owners eventually give up or sell off their property rights. And if I would suggest that you Google search the Delphi technique. That is a technique that's been used in our universities and our school system to achieve consensus where it would otherwise be very difficult. And incidentally, the Delphi technique was actually originally developed by Dr. Pavlov in the Soviet Union in the 1930s to help Stalin with his education programs. And are you aware that NGOs as such didn't exist in the U.S. prior to the 1950s? They're an invention of the United Nations technocrats to promote radical social and political change within society while appearing to be motivated by grassroots local or regional movements. These NGOs as such did not even exist here until the UN created them. There are hundreds of radical social and environmental movements that were originally sponsored and sanctioned by the UN and have become mainstays in U.S. environmental, wildlife, educational, social, and political movements. And this is a great little the Montana Policy Institute, my friend Carl Graham, did a study, and he tried to connect all the various NGOs and different foundations together. And please Google this up, montanalegacytakers.org. There is a site there, and you can connect all these various environmental and different foundations and where the money trail comes from. This is a really interesting program, so please go take a look at that. And this is a quote by Carl Blois of the communist publication, The Daily World. The environmental movement promises to bring greater numbers into our orbit than the peace movement ever did. And this is a quote by Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer, who happened to be the lead author of the IPCC program that basically defined anthropogenic global warming, man-caused global warming. And this is a quote from him. "We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore." This is a quote in 2010. And this is Christiana Figueres, and she's the executive director of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in Doha, Qatar, in 2012. It must be understood that what is occurring here, not just in Doha, but in the whole climate change process, is a complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. A centralized transformation that is going to make the life of everyone on the planet very different. So this is a picture of Beijing in 2008, just before the Olympics, and this shows the level of smog there. They had to shut the entire city down for about a month so that they could even hold the Olympics. But in reality, the environment's just used as a tool to transfer wealth from rich to poor countries who are 10 to 20 times more likely to pollute the environment because of their lax environmental laws. And I would suggest a transfer from capitalist countries to communist and socialist countries. Because if you see where the money's going, it's going to Brazil, it's going to India, it's going to China, it's going to Indonesia, it's going to countries that are either very heavily socialist or outright communist countries. This is a list of Agenda 21 Sustainable Development Warm and Fuzzy Expressions. Now, I put this list up here. It's going to be hard for people to read because it's fairly small, but words that we would hear once in a great while 20 years ago, now we hear on a daily basis. It's part of our common vernacular. Stakeholders, invasive species, quality of life, benefit of all, social justice, facilitators, traffic calming, sustainable medicine. I mean, the list goes on, but a lot of these things weren't part of our common language until after the Earth Summit, and they're being adopted on a regular basis. And you may recognize some of the programs that are either closely associated with or facilitating, and I'll use one of their own words, Agenda 21 policies, the Wildlands Project, the Clean Water Act, which is currently being expanded to all water in the United States. And it will be all water of the world, incidentally. The Clean Air Act, numerous wilderness bills, Antiquities and National Monuments Acts, National Grasslands Act, that's the free roaming bison. We had a great discussion about that over at the Mako conference today. Endangered Species Act, Large Predator Reintroduction, Interconnecting Wildlife Corridors, the Yukon to Yucatan, which they later changed to the Yellowstone to Yukon because of the public outcry, but it really is Yucatan to Yukon. North American Biodiversity Treaty, conservation easements nationwide, and finally the Law of the Sea Treaty, which is an international treaty that will regulate every drop of water on the planet. And this is the Wildlands Project, Yukon to Yucatan. And this is not my map. These maps are readily available. This map is right on the Wildlands Project site, and it shows all these interconnecting wilderness areas that will go all the way from Mexico to Alaska. And they haven't, some of these areas here, they haven't quite filled in yet. They're in the early planning stage of the project. These are further advanced. And incidentally, this is the National Grasslands, and we will take a look at that. Actually, let me go back. That group is out of Bozeman, Montana, that's promoting that. They're here in our midst promoting a lot of these efforts. This is the Wildlands Conservation Planning in Y2Y, and this is just another one of the maps, and these are available. You'll see the same areas, maybe a little different color, but the same thing. And this is a map of wilderness conservation forest priorities. I am on the Montana Stewardship Foundation as a trustee, and we look at areas in Montana that are being proposed as wilderness areas or conservation areas. And you'll see the dark areas right here. Those are the high priorities. And incidentally, you'll see where the funding for these high priorities. These are the competitive grants that are going into promoting many of these wilderness and conservation areas. And this is a fairly old one, but the funding is always targeted in the areas. It's always coincidental, but they're always targeted in areas that are part of these big maps that we've been looking at for anywhere from 5 to 25 years. This is a long-term process, and it's being treated very carefully as a long-term process. This is a map of proposed new wilderness in a bill sponsored by Carolyn Mahoney, who this was in 2010. She is a representative from Manhattan Island in New York City. She had a proposal for over 23 million acres in Idaho, Washington, Montana, Wyoming, and it's interesting to me that these people from places like New York City are driving so many of these wilderness bills. This is a map out of, this came from Range Magazine, but this is a map that came out of the World Wildlife Fund, currently listed as a priority area of concern by the Department of the Interior. This is the National Grasslands Initiative. We talked about that today at MACO. Free roaming bison and the end to much productive agriculture and resource development. There's a reason that we're being so restrictive on utilizing the oil and gas reserves that we have in eastern Montana. And this is the new spotted owl. This is the greater sage grouse, and this is a BLM planning map that they put together. And this shows the areas of high concern over sage grouse. This is you'll see Montana up here. This is Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Utah, and Oregon. And if this becomes an endangered species and gets listed, it will literally shut down most grazing on public lands throughout the western United States, and probably have almost total negative impact on the cattle industry. And they talk about habitat is the main cause for a reduction in habitat, is the main cause for the reduction in sage grouse. Well, they've done camera studies, and this little bugger right here, ravens, are the #1 cause of predation against sage grouse. They're nest robbers, as well as magpies and crows, and a lot of these smaller predators, we'll call them predators, badgers, coyotes, stuff like that. They'll actually eat the chicks or rob the eggs out of the nest and eat the eggs. And man's activity is way down on the list. According to the camera studies, it's about number 14. And this is a map from the Bureau of Land Management. It's only a year old. Average number of leases the BLM has issued during each administration. And we start out here with the Reagan administration at 8,800. And you can see the line. And I think you can see a pretty clear trend where leases on public land are going. I mean, that's almost a straight line down. So it won't be long and you won't see any public lands. Land swaps and acquisitions are being proposed all over Montana to consolidate FWP, NRCS, and federal land holdings. This is the Rob Ledford Wildlife Management Area in Madison and Beaverhead County, and FWP and a number of different government agencies came to southwest Montana and talked to the county commissioners in these counties. And what they wanted to do was try to consolidate under one ownership all of these areas. There were 6 of them that were being proposed, and they thought they could swap land back and forth between the various agencies so that each agency could control or mostly control one area. And this map right here shows how the different ownerships are, and if they could consolidate those, they'll make them really easy for the government to turn into the wilderness areas and conservation areas. And this is the Blackfoot Challenge. This is an area that you may be familiar with. It's up around the Avon area. This is the Nature Conservancy. They go in and act as a facilitator, and they buy up conservation easements and land, and then turn around and sell it to the federal government or the state of Montana. And that means that the federal government doesn't go through the necessary scrutiny that would be part of taking all this private land and turning it into public land. Anyway, this is the Blackfoot Challenge, and what we've been working with is these groups, Nature Conservancy in this area comes in, buys a bunch of conservation easements, buys a bunch of land, and then they turn around and they sell it to the state or federal government. And they get a premium for doing that. Now, they'll get tax credits and all other kinds of things. But the collaboration is that the federal government or the state FWP or other agencies can go in and get land, quite large tracts of land, without having to account for that to the taxpayers. And they don't have to go through the same processes and the same reviews that they would have to do if they were buying that land from individuals. And that little spot right there is this thing right here, and this is part of the Crown of the Continent. You guys are very familiar with that. Here's Flathead Lake right here, and the Crown of the Continent, and believe me, they are dead serious about getting all that land in the Crown of the Continent. It's promoted by, Bacchus while he was there, now Tester's working on it, and the Nature Conservancy. And the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is also a partner in that process. So most of these are working together to try to create this very, very large, very significant piece of land that fits right within that map that I showed you of the wilderness areas in the western states. Most of these programs involve restrictions on use of private property near public lands and the gradual implementation of absolute government control of property remaining in private hands. They have to control and regulate the areas around this public land, and in doing that, they can add to the public land. Every time these initiatives are expanded, the property tax base shrinks as a result of private land being taken off the tax rolls, and as a consequence, the cost and the restrictions to remaining property owners goes up and the productive use of their land goes down. This is how to boil a frog. Very, very slowly. You throw him in a pot of hot water, he'll jump right out. But if you put him in that pot and it's lukewarm and you turn it up a degree at a time, you'll cook him surely. And that's what's happening in our country. We're being the boiled frogs right now. It's called gradualism. This is a report by the National Intelligence Council. This was a report, and it was online. I think you can probably still find another iteration of this. This is several years old, but this was made for the president, and it basically, the executive summary says, if we don't hurry, we're not going to get global governance by 2025. We really need to get moving on these programs. It's all about government control. It's all about international global government. And you'll see the sponsors of this. It's the UN, the International Monetary Fund, the G20, all these groups that we see in all of our news programs, they're part of this whole process. A gentleman by the name of J. Gary Lawrence, he's the chief planner for the city of Seattle, which has some of the most restrictive zoning laws and some of the most costly housing in the country. Under Agenda 21, most Americans will be forced to live in high-rise apartment buildings on public transportation routes, and single-family residences will only be for the super wealthy and the ruling elite. Now, this is a program or a book that, not a book, but an article that he wrote for the UK, the UNED, UN Education Development Council for the UK. Future of Local Agenda 21 in the New Millennium. It went to the UK because if he'd written it in the United States and somebody got wind of it, there'd be a lot of problems. And this is a quote by J. Gary Lawrence in an article, The Future of Agenda 21 in the New Millennium. This is what was in that booklet. Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. How many times do we hear about smart growth in our zoning ordinances and in our planning? I mean, it's part of our culture now. ICLEI, and ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It's become the major driving force for smart growth policies throughout the United States. ICLEI programs have been implemented in 550 American cities, including Bozeman, Helena, and Missoula. And ICLEI uses the slogan Global to Local Action Plans and incorporates highly collectivist central planning concepts that were developed in the Soviet Union during the 1980s. Stack and pack housing projects located next to major transportation hubs that eliminate the use of private transportation. In essence, cities become islands of intense human activity in a sea of pristine natural wilderness areas that are off limits for average citizens. Dr. Michael Kaufman refers to these as human kennels. It's a pretty appropriate term. This is a future envisioned for most Americans under Agenda 21. I mean, they're not saying they're going to be absolutely nasty and mean to us. They're going to build these beautiful buildings, and they're going to be, it's called TOD, Transportation-Oriented Development. And it will be living under techno-feudalism. You'll live in a building next to a major transportation line. You get these rail lines. And these high-rise buildings, the space will be whatever they decide to give you. But right now in New York City, they're working on apartment buildings in New York City where an apartment is 374 square feet. And they're very compact. And I think ultimately that might seem spacious compared to what we might end up with. So, what is feudalism? I call it techno-feudalism. It's a return to servitude. Feudalism, via Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary, is a European political and economic system from the 9th to about the 15th century based on a relation of lord to vassal held on condition of homage and service. That's what we're facing in our future. We will be vassals. And this is Ghost City, a new city that was designed by a Chicago architectural firm for the Communist Chinese government. It will support, in the article that this was in Design Build magazine, said 80,000. I believe it will be, by the look of the structures, it'll be 800,000 Chinese with no automobiles allowed. This whole concept is totally pedestrian. And this park area that's just outside of it will be the public land. And this is a new commissioner training handout that we had some years ago. We all laugh about it. We've got a few commissioners here that remember this. It was most of the articles in this publication were on sustainable planning and development, and were written by authors representing the 3 Montana ICLEI cities, Helena, Missoula, and Bozeman. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'd say this is worth about 1,000,000. These 3 young people, they look kind of threadbare, not very well dressed on these old bicycles, don't look like very expensive ones, and they're on this concrete path that looks like it used to be an old roadway, and they're looking for the future, and they can't see the end of it. I think that's pretty appropriate. We need to understand that these sustainable development policies permeate every county in America and are being openly promoted by both political parties, both major political parties. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing. This is world socialism, world Marxism, world government, the New World Order versus those who believe in a constitutional Republican form of government. That's the difference. It's time that we stand as Americans and protect the liberties and freedoms guaranteed under our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We need to hold freedom more precious than comfort. We need to make thinking, reading, and participation in learning more important than leisure and being entertained. We need to get off the couch and get away from our beer, pretzels, and football games and start reading and learning and understanding what we're facing and start participating. We need to become enlightened, motivated protectors of our legacy and defend leaders that understand and are willing to risk everything to serve our republic. We need leaders, and we need good leaders. So what can you do to help? Well, you need to elect better public officials that understand their duty to serve and to protect the citizens they represent. Under the Constitution, local government should be the most representative of individual citizens. Our system of government was designed to be from the bottom up, not the top down. And it was designed that way so that local leaders who talk on a daily basis with the citizens they represent will be the strongest political influence in this country. We've got it completely backwards. We've got the almost dictatorial powers of the president, and the rest of us are just being blown along like leaves in the wind. That's wrong. We should not have to live that way, and we shouldn't allow it. Get involved. The reason that we've lost so many of our rights is because we've sat on our backsides and allowed everybody else to do the heavy lifting. He who shows up wins. We need to start showing up. We need to apply to boards and councils and these things. Yes, we're busy people. Yes, we don't want to control anybody else's life. But guess what? The people that volunteer for these boards are the people that want to control other people, and they have lots of time and they have lots of energy because they're living on the system that we're supporting. We need to start being the people that show up for these boards. We need to read, learn, educate yourself, and become teachers of others. Knowledge is power, and ignorance is not bliss. It's just ignorance. And if it's allowed to go on long enough, it becomes stupidity. Hold politicians and bureaucrats accountable and for all of their actions. And if you see something that you don't like, tell them about it and demand that they correct it. Don't expect something for nothing. There's no free money, and what we ask for today with borrowed money will enslave our children tomorrow. We need to care about their future. These so-called free grants and all this free money, there's no such thing as free money. Please go look on the internet and pull up the U.S. debt clock and watch that thing roll. Right now we're at 18 trillion in current debt and almost 123 trillion in unfunded liabilities that it's eating us alive. Our debt is eating us alive. It's time to realize that and quit spending money we don't have. If we can't afford it and can't afford it on our own merit, then we shouldn't have it, and we should say no. And this is a quote by Samuel Adams. It's excellent. If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude, better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity remember or forget that you were ever our countrymen. And this is a statue outside of the UN. That is really, that should give you a pretty good idea where these relentless attacks on our Second Amendment rights are coming from. They're not just hapless American politicians, they're international politicians. Advertising campaign in New York City promoting gun control. Of course. Why would China or any other country that would like to see our demise want us to be armed? And this is a great quote by Ronald Reagan. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we will sentence them to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness. If we fail, at least let our children and our children's children say of us that we justified our brief moment here. We did all that could be done. That's what we need to do. There are none so blind as those who will not see. There are none so deaf as those who refuse to hear. That's a quote from Polite Conversation, Jonathan Swift, and that's 1738. And thank you for attending this presentation. God bless America. And I am going to talk a little bit about the Water Compact, too. So I'll go to the last slide that I've got here. Looks like we've had a little bit too much to think. That's the thought police. Anyway, the Salish Kootenai, we've been talking about that today at May.
Okay, Dan asked me to go ahead and stop the video there at that point. Wow, excellent presentation, Dan. And people may realize that you did that presentation a couple of years ago.
That's actually, Thumper, that's about 6 or 7 years ago. And
okay,
yeah, a lot of the information was even older. I started doing these programs about 15 years ago. And everybody looked at me like I had 3 eyeballs when I first started doing this. But now I think hopefully our audience sees. Do you see anything on there that we haven't actually seen happening now live and firsthand in this country within the last, even within the last few months?
Oh, I tell you what, the reality is showing up daily as far as what's been going on there. It's becoming very, 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 very real. And people are definitely starting to, see that that third eye of yours was it was run in 2010.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I've had a number of people who are really tuned into the Agenda 21 stuff, including people like Tom DeWeese and others who have told me that this program that I did ties Agenda 21, the sustainability movement, and world government all together in a way that is so crystal clear, and communism in a way that's so crystal clear that even the dumbest cluck can't see this and not get it. So anyway, I was hoping that our listeners, our audience would enjoy this as a run-up, because you're going to get a first-person account of COP25. That's a conference on UN Agenda 2030 in Madrid, Spain. You're going to be getting a first-hand account of that from Debbie Boscalupi and Alex Newman, who were both there, and they watched the circus of fools firsthand. and they'll tell you just exactly what they have planned for us. So
yeah, absolutely. And people might recall Debbie Bacalucci, or how you say her name?
Bacigalupi.
Bacigalupi. Okay, she was one of my first interviews. I interviewed her on the channel here prior to going to the Red Pill event, because she was part of the group that helped you put on the Red Pill event here in Spokane.
Right.
And she came on as a guest here on Patriot Soapbox back there in 2017 as one of my first interviews. So looking forward to connecting back up with Debbie and seeing her back on the channel.
Well, Thumper, she and I were working with Joe McNeil on the micro effect a couple of years ago. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think she may be able to find a home doing some radio with Patriot Soapbox. So I'm looking forward to that. And I have to tell you, she's a fantastic little gal. She's a great personal friend. So is Alex Newman. But Debbie is she's got the most, I guess what I would call a vivacious personality. And you talk about a dedicated patriot. She is it. So if you get a chance to do some radio programs with Debbie, which I think you will, she is going to be a really good tool for Patriot Soapbox.
Well, it would be nice if we had some spots that where she could come on and because she is a veritable expert on Agenda 20 and Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and her family is going through a lot of these issues. They own a ranch down in Northern California, and they get to see it up close and personal as far as what her family and what they're going through as far as their ranch is concerned. So she's been very, very active in all of this. And just as an aside, yes, this is little Q Cat here. He's sleeping very, very comfortably there on his pillow.
I have to tell you, Thumper, that one of the great things about Debbie is that she is so active throughout California, throughout the country, but she, like me, knows so many people that are terrific leaders in the Patriot movement. And so she can bring an awful lot of really quality guests to radio. And she's introduced me to people. I've introduced her to people. It's been a really fascinating relationship. But in any case, she is one of the leaders on the movement to expose what they're doing with dams. I don't know if you remember, but that's one of the items that they've got targeted under Agenda 21 is the destruction of reservoirs and dams and turning all of our rivers and streams and everything back to their natural courses with no impediments to their flow. In other words, they're going to get rid of all dams. Well, they get rid of dams, they're getting rid of irrigation, they're getting rid of recreation, they're getting rid of a lot of things that Americans have grown accustomed to and that have led to our ability to feed the world.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that if they do get rid of the dams, what are they going to replace that power with? Are they going to give us some of this, secret, hidden away from everybody else, 0-point energy, free energy, the energy from the ether, but you still have the irrigation and all of that to deal with as well. But
Thumper, I have to tell you, there's a method to their madness. Understand one thing: they plan to eliminate all ranching and farming, meat production, anything that has to do with meat consumption.
Mhm.
But keep in mind, they plan to reduce our population to fewer than 1 billion people. They don't care if we have to live in the dark, if we have not enough food. That's part of the program. And when people think, well, why in the world would a sane person do something like this? It's because they're not sane. These people are maniacs. These people are ideologues, and they see the human beings on Earth as being little more than ants or lice. That's the way these people think.
Oh, absolutely. They want nothing more than just to have complete and total control over us from cradle to grave and every moment in between. And so I'm definitely would love to see, but we allow that to happen when we don't stand up and step up and be responsible about what we're doing. We, as a people, we cannot hand it off to somebody else to do for us, because as soon as you do, you might as well just move back in with mom and dad, okay, and give them total control of your life. Why did you move out of your mom and dad's house? Why did you go out and go out on your own, only to hand over your responsibilities to a government who will take more than your parents ever thought of taking from you, as far as your ability to act in a responsible and free manner? It makes absolutely no sense that we allow this government to do to us what we've been allowing them to do. And it's got to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is that we stand up, and and it's even more than just me and you sitting here at a microphone. We have to get involved. I love the opportunity to be able to talk about these things and inspire people. Hopefully we inspire people to go out and do some things. But we ourselves, you have done so with running for county commissioner there in your area there. And we have other patriots that are stepping up to run for office and be the good guys in those offices, and kick these psychopaths out of there. And so it really is. But it also, even if you're not actively involved, you have to be well informed. And again, the Mockingbird media has done a really good job of misinforming everyone. And as a result, the fault lies in two places.
It does. It's our own fault that we've allowed this to happen. But at the same time, there's a great analogy. There's a great saying. You can't win the game unless you're in the game. And that's what it boils down to. The people who are winning the game are the ones who have been participating, and those are the ones that want to control everything we do from cradle to grave.
Absolutely.
So if we want to get back in the game, the only way that's going to happen if we get off our dead butts and get out and do it. And the smallest little board is something that's important. It's important that you run for the school board. It's important that you run for city council or county commissioner or state representative. It's important that you run for a fire board. You need to be involved. And if you're not involved, I'm sorry, if we lose this country, you're the ones that did it. It's like that statement by John Adams, lick the hands that feed you. If you don't care and you think money is more important than freedom, then go ahead, lick the hands that feed you, and we'll forget about you because you were never our countrymen.
So true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. Again, I just got another article that came out today. It's from AmmoLand. This is a Dave Workman article on Matt Shea. You mind if I share it here in the last couple minutes?
I think that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
All right, let me get this up here because we are working. Dan and I are working hard to try to get Matt Shea to come on, and this is some of what he's dealing with. Pro-gun Washington State Representative Matt Shea accused by partisan report of domestic terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
Pro-rights Republican Washington State Representative was suspended from access to House staff and caucus meetings this week after a report by a private firm called Rampart Group. Check them out here. Alleged he participated in domestic terrorism against the United States, according to the Seattle Times. Well, we all know Seattle Times is straight up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Amaland News reviewed the 108-page report, which had been engaged by the Washington State House of Representatives earlier this year and backed by Republicans. According to the report, Rampart Group, LLC investigators have obtained evidence that Representative Shea, as a leader of the Patriot Movement, planned, engaged in, and promoted a total of 3 armed conflicts of political violence against the United States government in 3 states outside the state of Washington over a 3-year period, close quote. Amaland News reached out to Shea for comment, but he did not respond. However, he did post a message on his Facebook page that is receiving lots of reaction. My initial response: like we are seeing with our president, this is a sham investigation meant to silence those of us who stand up against attempts to disarm and destroy our great country. I will not back down. I will not give in. I will not resign. Stand strong, fellow patriots. Thank you to everyone for the massive outpouring of support and prayers. I will continue to defend the Constitution against tyranny and fight to protect our God-given unalienable right to life, liberty, property, and the ability to defend the same, close quote. Mm-hmm. Shea from far eastern Washington's Spokane Valley has become known as a stalwart gun rights advocate during his time in Washington State Legislature. He's appeared several times at the Second Amendment rallies held in Olympia on the Capitol steps. But allegations in the report are disturbing. The report says Shea dispatched local militia Liberty for all 3 percenters. Washington leader Anthony Bosworth to Bunkerville, Nevada in April 19th of 2014 to assess the need for an armed militia to stand against the U.S. government in support of rancher Cliven Bundy and his family in resistance to a federal court order. Further, the report states Shea prepared and posted a plea on 3% Militia website on April 10th, 2014, for Patriot Movement members nationwide to travel to Bunkerville and stand with the Bundy family. It resulted in the April 11th, 2014 turnout of approximately 1,500 armed militia members that stood against the U.S. government. The report also says Shea called the visit to Bunkerville a fact-finding mission. We're over our time here, and I apologize.
Yeah, we are, Thumper. I want to say, though, I read that entire report, and Matt Shea in that report, everything that he said in there was to try to diffuse armed actions by the federal government. Yeah. And incidentally, Bunkerville, they said 1,500 armed militiamen. In fact, there was a very small percentage that were armed. Mm-hmm. Most of the people at Bunkerville were disarmed, and they were there hoping the federal government didn't kill them, because the federal government had the sniper pits and all the surveillance and stuff set up. Patrick Howley is waiting to come on board. Patrick, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and thank you for being patient, my friend.
Hey, guys, have a great show, and we'll see everybody next week for Connecting the Dots with Dan.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic.